Pacific 4014, the Big Boy. 4014 is the latest and largest steam locomotive to join the Union Pacific steam program. In this series, we'll follow the world's largest operational steam locomotive as it travels from Omaha, Nebraska to the Twin Cities in Minnesota as it did its great race across the Midwest. In this volume, we'll begin our chase of this engine as it runs from Omaha, Nebraska to Boone, Iowa. We'll see the engine as it storms across the old Chicago and Northwestern Main Line at many locations. We'll also see this engine as it crosses the famed Shelley Bridge, and at the end of the video, even visit the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad. We'll also get some great pacing action along certain sections of the route. While we chase 4014 across Iowa, we'll also get to see the mainline action here as well, as Union Pacific's freight trains still continue to roll as the excursion train rolls on through. Well, without any further delay, let's get this show on the road. Union Pacific Railroad. One of the oldest surviving railroads in the United States, starting in 1862, it is also the largest railroad in the nation with a system spanning 31,000 miles. The UP also has the only steam program in the United States. From its beginnings in 1960, the steam program was well known for its operation of Union Pacific 844 and later Union Pacific 3985 as they pulled many excursion trains across the growing Union Pacific network. They even ventured off the UP rails, with 3985 going as far east as Kingsport, Tennessee. Then, in 2012, the Union Pacific stunned the railroad world when it announced its intentions of reacquiring one of their big boys to operate in its steam program. After looking at all the remaining big boys across the nation, the Union Pacific decided in 2013 that Big Boy 4014 was the best candidate for restoration. Looking at the history of this engine, Union Pacific 4014 was built in November of 1941 by Alco in Schenectady, New York, as part of the first order of 20 big boys for the Union Pacific Railroad. Once delivered to the Union Pacific, 4014, along with the other big boys, were assigned to pull the railroad's longest and heaviest trains at the time between Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Ogden, Utah, over both the Wasatch Mountains in Utah and Sherman Hill west of Cheyenne, Wyoming. 4014 did this job well until July 21, 1959. On that day, 4014 pulled its last revenue train for the Union Pacific, and when it finished its run, it was retired. It stayed in storage on the railroad until 1962, when the Union Pacific donated 4014 to the Southern California chapter of Railway and Locomotive Historical Society in Pomona, California. Once in Pomona, the engine was then put on display and later became part of the Society's Rail Giants Train Museum. After negotiations with the Society, 4014's ownership was transferred back to the Union Pacific Railroad, and the engine was towed from its display in Pomona, California, back to the Union Pacific steam shops in Cheyenne, Wyoming for restoration. Then, on May 1st, 2019, around 9 p.m., UP 4014 moved under its own power for the first time in 59 years and became the world's largest operational steam locomotive. After its test runs, Union Pacific then announced 3 tours for 4014: the Great Race to Ogden, the Great Race across the Midwest, and the Great Race across the Southwest as part of the Union Pacific's celebration of the 175th anniversary of the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. In this series, we'll be following 4014 on its portion of the Great Race across the Midwest from Omaha, Nebraska to the Twin Cities of Minnesota. The Midwest Tour had 4014 starting out its journey from its new home base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and making its way east to Boone, Iowa. Then the Giant would head north to the Twin Cities and eventually the Twin Ports of Minnesota and Wisconsin on Lake Superior. Once its visit there was over, 4014 would then travel back south to the Twin Cities and then southeast across Wisconsin to the city of Chicago, Illinois. After visiting Chicago, 4014 would then finally head back west across northern Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska to finish its round-trip journey back in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The date is July 15th, 2019, and my dad, brother, and I were at the Musical Hills Lane Railroad crossing just north of Council Bluffs, Iowa. The day before, on July 14th, 4014 was on display at UP Home Plate in Omaha for the city's annual Railroad Days Festival. July 15th, the Giant was scheduled to leave Omaha with a one-way excursion to Boone, Iowa, where 4014 would then spend the night. Soon it was time for 4014 to depart Omaha, Nebraska, and a few minutes later, we then got to see the Giant for the first time at speed.
Sorry, I was going to pan over towards the signal.
Thank you. Oh, here it comes. After we caught 4014 here, we then got some pacing action along Jocelyn Avenue north of Council Bluffs, Iowa. The one-way excursion train 4014 was pulling was sponsored by the Union Pacific Railroad Museum in Council Bluffs, Iowa, in celebration of 4014's return. All proceeds made from this run all went to the Union Pacific Railroad Museum. After our pacing action, We then hopped on the highway to get to Missouri Valley, Iowa. Here we got set up at the 6th Street Railroad crossing in town. For the first part of our chase of 4014, we were on Union Pacific's Omaha subdivision, which runs from Fremont, Nebraska through its namesake city and ends in Missouri Valley, Iowa. Here in Missouri Valley, the Omaha sub meets Union Pacific's Blair sub, which runs west from here also to Fremont, Nebraska, and the Boone subdivision, which runs east from here to Boone, Iowa. Although the Union Pacific considers both the Omaha and Blair subdivisions as main lines, most traffic coming to and from Chicago and the West Coast usually uses the Blair subdivision, as it has a more direct connection to the first transcontinental railroad in Fremont, Nebraska, bypassing Omaha altogether. Missouri Valley is also home to a small yard where locomotives are based. There was also a Union Pacific coal train waiting here on the main line, and by the looks of it, besides the rail fans, all the personnel of the yard had came out here to see Union Pacific 4014 pass by. Soon, everyone heard the whistle of 4014 in the distance, and we all got prepared to see the giant again roll by. The next place we saw the train was at the Boyers River Bridge, just south of Dunlap, Iowa. This bridge was built in 1948 by the American Bridge Company of New York for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad to replace an older bridge. On either side of this worn through truss bridge are two more bridges. On the east side of the bridge is the Lincoln Highway/Route 30 bridge, and on the west side of the bridge is the former Illinois Central Railroad Bridge, now operated by the Canadian National Railroad. Ever since we left Council Bluffs, Iowa, we have been following two railroad lines. The old Chicago and Northwestern Railroad line, now operated by the Union Pacific, and the old Illinois Central Railroad line, now operated by the Canadian National. Both lines follow each other very closely from Council Bluffs, Iowa, all the way to Denison, Iowa. Once there, both lines take their own ways to get to Chicago. I was hoping to see a Canadian National train on the other line as we were chasing the big boy, but alas, that didn't happen. After about 5 or 10 minutes of waiting, we then heard the whistle again and got ready to see the giant thunder by. After seeing the train at the bridge, we then tried to get ahead of the train, but if anyone has seen the traffic jams that were generated during the Great Race to Ogden, it happened here as well. It wasn't until we reached Denison, Iowa, where we saw the train again. Here, the train came to a stop so that the locals who lived here could see the giant up close. While they were doing that, my dad, brother, and I broke off for lunch. After lunch, we then drove outside of town to wait for the excursion. From Denison to just halfway between Val and Westside, Iowa, we got some great pacing action of 4014 as it went down the old Chicago and Northwestern Main Line. Tucked in behind 4014 and its water tanks is Union Pacific 8167, a GE ES44 AC-8, built in 2014. It was there to act as backup power just in case any problems arose during 4014's run. But for now, 8167 is just getting a free ride as 4014 did all the work. While we were pacing the train, we ran across two westbound Union Pacific trains. The first one we saw was a freight train led by UP 7940, a GE AC-45 CC2E, UP 2572, an ET-44AH, and UP 7073, an AC-4460 CW. The line we are chasing Union Pacific 4014 on was first built in 1867 by the Cedar Rapids and Missouri River Railroad between Cedar Rapids and Council Bluffs, Iowa. The line was one of 4 railroads built as a result of the Iowa Land Bill of 1856, which gave land grants to railroads building in Iowa. The CR and MRR was leased to the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad, which later became the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. By 1884, the Chicago and Northwestern then purchased the Cedar Rapids and Missouri River Railroad, and it stayed in their hands all the way up until 1995, when the Union Pacific Railroad then merged the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad into their system. No, he's just going slow. Again, as we were following 4014, we then caught our second Union Pacific train, a westbound intermodal train led by Union Pacific 7387, a GE AC45 CCTE, UP 6481, an AC44CW, UP 2738, ET4488, and UP 6935, an AC4460 CW. reached the end of the pacing area and decided to get ahead of the train. The next place we saw the train at was at the Ivy Avenue/Road N20 Railroad crossing in Maple River, Iowa, just before the train's next stop in Carroll, Iowa. Maple River used to be the junction where the Chicago Northwestern's Carnarvon branch split off from the main line. At Carnarvon, Iowa, it met 4 other Chicago Northwestern lines, 2 of which went to Sioux City, Iowa. Today, the branch line is now abandoned and is now the Sauk Rail Trail. After seeing the train in Maple River, we then stopped in Carroll, Iowa. Here, 4014 came to another stop right next to the old Chicago and Northwestern Carroll Depot. No matter where 4014 went, large groups of people, both rail fans and the average person, came out here to see the giant in person. There was also law enforcement out here as well to help control the crowds. Soon, 4014 gave the 5-minute whistle.
You're getting ready to go.
Or maybe they're moving it. If you want to see a nice train, you should go check out that Christmas train in Kentucky. Right go we chased the joke. You ever heard of it? Look back.
Once 5 minutes was up, they then departed Carroll, Iowa, in grand fashion.
I got a friend, Tim Townsend.
He's got that computerized logbook now, don't he?
I heard a lot of them. Where you got the parade.
I think they know where you're at 24/7. I think everybody's got to know
Well, one guy stays with the older truck, John Page does,
yeah.
He gets by with it.
But how can he do that?
I don't know how. Another guy checking for any strollers or. What you got to be like that guy with the drone up there. See the drone, Bob? You guys are way behind old school here. That's new school.
That's technology,
That thing can follow it all the way.
Unless you had a 410.
All right,
They always supposed to do that.
he's not moving that fast. Jump on.
They're all empty. We can be on there.
Huh?
They're all empty. We can be on there.
There's where we get on it.
Run!
Once the train got by us, we then drove ahead of it and saw the train again at the D Avenue Railroad crossing just west of Scranton, Iowa. Here, we really got the feel of the vastness of the Iowa countryside in America's heartland. It seems like these fields just go on for miles and miles. Just as I was thinking some baseball guys would come out of the fields, we then saw the headlights of 4014 in the distance. Although 4014 is the largest operational steam locomotive in the world, the giant just looked like a blip on the Iowa landscape as it came towards us. After seeing 4014 roll across the Iowa countryside, we then drove to the famed Kate Shelley High Bridge just west of Boone, Iowa. The Kate Shelley High Bridge, officially called the Boone Viaduct by the railroad, is a deck truss bridge built between 1899 and 1901 by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad and designed by George S. Morrison. The bridge was built over the Des Moines River Valley and is 2,685 feet long and 185 feet at its tallest point, making it one of the highest and longest double-track bridges in the United States. The bridge was built as part of a line relocation project by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad in order to eliminate the steep grades and pusher engines of the original 1867 line. Going from Boone to Ogden, Iowa, the original 1867 line first went south from Boone, Iowa, following Honey Creek down to the Des Moines River. Once at the Des Moines River, the line then crossed it and went to Moingana, Iowa. Then the line would climb out of the Des Moines River Valley by following Coal Valley Creek before reaching Ogden, Iowa. Today, this line is now abandoned. The reason why this bridge is called the Kate Shelley High Bridge is because of Catherine Carroll Shelley, or Kate Shelley for short. She was born on September 25, 1865, in the small village of Dunkerin, Ireland. A year later, when Kate was just 1.5 years old, her family immigrated to the United States and eventually settled down just east of Moingana, Iowa, between the Des Moines River and Honey Creek. Her father, Mitchell Shelley, managed to get a job as a foreman for a section crew of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad and built many lines for the CNNW until he died in 1878. When her father died, Kate Shelley had to step up and take care of the family farm she lived on. As the story goes, on the night of July 6, 1881, when Kate was just 15 years old, a heavy thunderstorm swept across Iowa. It caused flash flooding on the Des Moines River and Honey Creek. When she saw that the floodwaters were coming close to the barn, she went outside to get the farm animals out of there before the floodwaters could reach the barn. At the same time, thanks to the flood, the bridge that carried the 1867 railroad line across Honey Creek was damaged. During all of this, at the Moingana Depot, a pusher engine based out of there was sent east to check the bridges over the Des Moines River and Honey Creek. The pusher engine was operated by Ager Wood, A.P. Olmsted, Adam Ager, and Patrick Donahue. They were doing this to make sure that the line was safe for the Midnight Express. The Midnight Express was a passenger train that ran at night between Council Bluffs, Iowa, and Chicago and back. The engine made it across the Des Moines River safely, but when the engine reached the Honey Creek Bridge, the bridge gave way under the engine's weight, and the engine and its crew plunged into Honey Creek. Kate heard the crash from her house and knew in an instant what happened. She also knew about the Midnight Express, and if she didn't do anything about it, the train would plunge into Honey Creek, taking many lives in the process. So, with a lit lantern, she set off in the storm to get to the Moingana Depot, which was the closest station to stop the train. When she got to the remains of the Honey Creek Bridge, she found Ager Wood and Adam Ager stranded in the trees. She shouted at them that she would get help once she got to the Moingana Depot. She then continued her treacherous journey westward to Moingana. In order for her to reach Moingana, she had to cross the Des Moines River Bridge, which at the time was built only for trains to use. The Des Moines River itself was a raging torrent, and combined with the rain and the wind, threatened to knock Kate off the bridge and send her downriver to who knows where. As she was crossing the bridge, the lantern she had went out, and she was forced to crawl on her hands and knees all the way across the bridge, with only the lightning for illumination. Despite all the odds, she made it across the bridge and ran to the Moingana Depot. Once there, she raised the alarm about the bridge, and the Midnight Express was stopped at Scranton, Iowa, saving 200 lives. After raising the alarm, she then led the rescue of Ager Wood and Adam Ager. The only fatalities of this entire incident were Patrick Donahue and A.P. Olmsted. Patrick's body was found in a cornfield about a quarter of a mile away from the Honey Creek Bridge, and Olmsted's body was never found. Once the storm was over, Kate's story spread like wildfire, and she was heralded as a hero across the nation. Both the little girls of Dubuque, Iowa, and the state of Iowa gave Kate a gold medal for her heroic actions, as well as $200 by the state. The Order of Railway Conductors gave her a gold watch and chain. And the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad gave Kate $100, a half barrel of flour, a half a load of coal, and a lifetime pass to ride the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad whenever she wanted. When the Boone Viaduct was finished in 1901, many people quickly called the bridge the Kate Shelley Bridge or the Kate Shelley High Bridge in her honor. For the rest of Kate Shelley's life, she stayed at her family farm east of Moingana, Iowa, doing various jobs until she passed away on January 12, 1912. Despite Kate Shelley's death, her legacy still lives on, not only in the bridges, but in her story and in songs. Getting back to the Kate Shelley High Bridge itself, by the mid-1950s, the bridge was limited to just one train at a time, and by 1986, some of the towers holding up the bridge were damaged in a windstorm. When the Union Pacific Railroad took over the line, the UP started an inspection and rebuilding program in 2001, which reopened double-track running across the bridge, but trains were restricted to 25-mile-per-hour running due to the bridge's age at this point. Between 2006 and 2009, the Union Pacific Railroad constructed the new Kate Shelley Bridge, which is the concrete structure behind the steel one. The new Kate Shelley Bridge could handle 2 trains simultaneously at speeds up to 70 miles per hour. It's 2,813 feet long and 190 feet at its tallest point. Sadly, once the new bridge was completed, the old bridge's days of being used were numbered. Today, mainline traffic now uses the new Kate Shelley Bridge, as the old bridge was left standing. Gratefully, from our vantage point on Juneberry Road, one can still get shots of trains as if they're still using the old bridge. Many people had gathered here, eagerly awaiting for 4014 to pass by on the bridge. Soon we heard the whistle of 4014 in the distance, and got ready to see the train cross the bridge. After watching 4014 cross the Des Moines River, we then caught back up with the excursion train at its final stop of the day in Boone, Iowa. As usual, many people, both rail fans and residents alike, had came out here to see the Giant of Steam. Here, the passengers who rode the Union Pacific excursion train from Omaha, Nebraska behind 4014 disembarked the train. They'll now be bussed back to Omaha. With the passengers now gone, 4014, 8167, along with some of the passenger cars, tool cars, and water cars, were uncoupled from the rest of the train. We then watched as Union Pacific 4380 and EMD SD70M, built in 2001, rolled by us. After 4380 got past us, 4014 then rolled on by to get into Boone Yard. The cars being taken off the excursion train were 207, 7011, the Missouri River Eagle, 9009, the city of San Francisco, and 8008, the city of Portland. Once past the switch, 4380 will back onto the city of Portland to take off the 4 cars from 4014. Right next to the old Chicago and Northwestern Main Line is the current Boone Depot. This depot was built to replace an older 1880s built depot which was destroyed in a fire. The depot used to have platforms to serve many of the Northwestern's and Union Pacific's passenger trains, such as the Challenger, the City of Los Angeles, the Kate Shelley 400, and many other passenger trains, mostly from the Union Pacific. Sadly, when passenger service on the line ended, the platforms were demolished and the tracks were removed, leaving only the main line next to the depot. As of today, the depot is still used by the Union Pacific Railroad and still sees plenty of train action. Just across the street from the depot is the Veterans Memorial Park. This park was dedicated on September 5, 1991, to honor all the men and women who served in the armed forces of the United States of America. The park also has ex-Chicago and Northwestern 12566, an extended vision caboose on display here. These cabooses were on the rage in the 1970s and 80s, with many American railroads using them. As of today, many of these cabooses are now either in museums, scenic railroads, or at parks on display across the country, as they were replaced by the Fred, a flashing little box now on the backs of trains today. But if you know where to look, some Class 1 railroads, such as Norfolk Southern, still use some of their extended vision cabooses on their locals. Right on the wall of the adjacent building is a mural painting of one of the Chicago and Northwestern's famed 400 passenger trains as it passes a freight train on the main line, while it passes under a classic Chicago and Northwestern semaphore signal bridge. As we were looking at the mural, we then saw 4380 as it pulled the 4 cars off of 4014 and across the switch. passenger cars will be later taken back to Council Bluffs, Iowa, where the Union Pacific passenger car fleet is based. A little later, after 4380 got by, we then moved to the Green Street Railroad crossing. Here we got to see 4014 once again. They are in the process of backing onto the rest of their train. Engineer Ed Dickens, currently the head of the Union Pacific Steam Program and the man who led the team that brought back the big boy once again, is at the throttle of 4014 as they back down the line. With the passenger cars now attached, 4014 then led the train into Boone Yard to stay the night. And with that, we are at the end of our first day of chasing the big boy. The next day, we would then chase 4014 as it runs from here to Mason City, Iowa, across the old Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Main Line. But we'll save that for Volume 2. Before we finish the video, we made one more stop in Boone, Iowa. No visit to Boone, Iowa will be complete without a visit to the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad. The Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad is a tourist railroad and museum that runs from here to Wolf, Iowa, over the tracks of the former Fort Dodge, Des Moines, and Southern Railroad. They are most notable for their operation of China Railway's 8419, a JS Class 282 Mikado built in the late 1980s for the Scenic Railroad itself. At the time of the making of this video, 8419 is currently under a 1472 inspection and is not operational at the moment. By the time we got here, the Scenic Railroad was already closed for the day, and the JS Class engine was put up in the sheds. But we did get to see many of the other pieces of equipment the museum has outside the depot. Another notable steam engine the museum has is Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railway No. 17. CONE No. 17 is a Canadian-built locomotive which first worked for the Robert Val and Saguenay Railway in northern Quebec, Canada. In 1975, the Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railway purchased No. 17 for their tourist operations. But when the railroad discontinued their tourist operations in 1978, the engine was assigned to pull the railroad's freight trains, making the Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railway the last common carrier railroad in the United States to use steam power to haul their freight trains. The engine stayed in operation until September 8, 1986, when the engine suffered a mechanical failure which put the engine out of service and ended steam operations on the Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railway. After the engine's abrupt retirement, the Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railway then sold No. 17 to the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad on February 9, 1987, and the engine has been on display here ever since. Another engine we saw here was Boone and Scenic Valley / Chicago and Northwestern 6540, an EMD FP9A. This engine was built in 1958, originally for the Canadian National Railway. It pulled many of the railroad's notable passenger trains, such as the Supercontinental, the Ocean Limited, the Maple Leaf, and many other passenger trains until it was sold to Via Rail in the early 1980s. It stayed with Via Rail, doing what it did best until the late 1990s, when it was retired. Eventually, it ended up being sold to the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad, where it was given its Chicago and Northwestern styled paint scheme. One more notable engine I would like to bring up here is Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend Railroad No. 106. 106 is a PCM interurban car built in 1926 by the Pullman Car Company. It was designed to pull rapid transit trains from downtown Chicago to South Bend, Indiana and back. What makes this car special is that instead of using steam or diesel to turn the wheels, 106 uses the electricity provided by an electric overhead to power electric motors in the trucks to turn the wheels. The car stayed on the South Shore line, hauling many passengers until it was retired in 1984 and replaced. Eventually, 106 ended up on the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad and is now operated on their electrified section between their depot and a small halt on Story Street, although the electrification ends just east of there at Tama Street. Although we didn't get to ride the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad, it was great just to visit them. If you're ever visiting Boone, Iowa, I highly recommend paying them a visit. They are located at 225 10th Street, Boone, Iowa. They are open Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., Friday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays from 12 to 4 p.m. You can also visit their website at https://bsvrr.com/wp/ for more information there. And to finish this video off, we caught one more train on the old Chicago and Northwestern Main Line, led by 3 ex-Missouri Pacific EMD GP15-1s. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Join us in Volume 2 as we continue our chase of 4014 to Mason City, Iowa, and see many more neat things along the way. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you later.